Welcome to the Going Green podcast. Today we're going to have a look at the nasty topic of food waste. Yeah, food waste in the UK is a problem. In fact, it's such a big problem that basically it's even hard to sort of work out
Where to begin with, or where to start even fixing it.
yeah. So, according to the figures, which are a little bit vague, basically 6.4 million tons of edible food are wasted every year.
Mm.
And that food could have been used to feed people who are starving. So we have a big problem in this country. And before you think, yeah, okay, the rest of the world's okay, no, it's not. It's a worldwide problem largely,
Yeah,
and it's mostly in developed countries.
yeah. It's one of those things where it's the availability of food means that basically the developed countries are actually throwing more edible food away than the developing countries, even the poor and less developed countries, where food is very scarce. So they actually do try to actually use as much as they can, basically, because otherwise, they're throwing away things they could eat when they're starving. Yeah, it's those sort of things. So the next big question, I say, is not how much food do we produce, but how much food do we actually throw away? Good food. I mean, food that you could actually go in and technically eat out of the bin. Though I wouldn't advise it, but if any, and
Eat before they throw in the bin.
yeah, the answer is it's what is known as edible food in the food waste list of definitions.
Yeah. And so, well, I was going to come up with another important fact.
All right, okay, you go for that one. I'll tell you my one in a sec.
And I was going to say that the UK actually has improved markedly in recent years. Since 2007, we've cut the household food waste by over 20%.
It's one of those dumb things where we're working on it. We're not doing, but it's still a lot of money. It was estimated that approximately, in the time of a small, not economic crisis, but we're talking, cost of living crisis, that apparently 13.5 billion pounds worth of food is being thrown away. Now, I'm not saying, that all of it should be thrown away. However, you could almost argue that sort of we're currently binning, we could be wasting, we're just wasting money by just throwing away edible food, good food.
And if we could just redistribute it, it would be useful.
Yeah.
But there are rules on this, Paul. And the rules are from the government. There is some statutory guidance, which is called the Food and Drink Waste Hierarchy. Deal with surplus and waste. And that was only just recently updated on the 6th of April. And it's guidance for any business and any organisation which produces, handles, treats, or disposes of surplus waste food and drink. And that means things like the farmers, it means the manufacturers, the retailers, hospitality, food service providers, local authorities. And basically those things those items, those companies, whatever, those areas should be minimizing the environmental effect of food and drink waste, maximizing the amount of surplus by perhaps reselling or donating to charity, and reducing all waste. And it's not happening really, or not happening enough.
Yeah, I would say enough. It's one of those things where you hear when the pandemic came through and lockdown came through, they said turns out that food waste actually went down, and the reason half of it went down was because, say, let's say restaurants suddenly couldn't sell to customers, and so they had all this food and basically go off, and so they were giving it to food charities to pass it on onto I say not customers, but onto people so they can have a decent meal. And basically we were consuming less food, but we weren't consuming the food. It was basically more people were actually consuming that changes the numbers round, but less waste was being produced because, of course, it was all being used up because, of course, all these, going to charities, all the things, but also less food was being not manufactured. That's the wrong way to pause it, but it's sort of, instead of going to restaurant and then not being done, it was actually sort of what is the minimum work to go through, because of course staffing levels through the manufacture process, although they were deemed key workers and so they had to continue working, they were deemed as sort of working, the factory was only working at, say, 75% capacity or something silly like that, because of course it didn't need to fill all those shelves because those shelves
weren't
being empty. So that's the sort of play. But after the lockdown lifted, and we're talking in the last 2 years, because it is a biannual sort of statistic that moves on, is that actually food waste has actually now gone and increased because, of course, the pandemic being the anomaly, it's going back up to normal levels. And that's a bit of a shame. Sort of, we were actually doing well, and, unfortunately, that's just how it goes.
So there are some silly facts that, research has shown that the UK wastes some sort of 10 million tons of food every year. 2 million of that comes from the food industry, and only 1% of that is recycled for human consumption. So if we look at this country, we're told, with all the people going around struggling to eat, food banks and all that, some 8.4 million people are struggling to eat. Yet, basically, we're one of the richest countries in the world, and we shouldn't have all those numbers of people struggling to eat. Part of that problem, I think, is the simple fact that we buy too much food. Christmas is the typical example when we watch people in the supermarkets going around and they're buying like there is literally no tomorrow. And how much of that food will end up being thrown away?
Yes, it is the sort of, the shops are going to close for 2 days. How will I survive? I'm going to have to stock up for 14 days or something silly.
Or 6 months. Yeah. So if we put it into context, when you go and buy shopping and you buy 5 bags of shopping food, then one of those 5 is basically wasted. And that's a terrible fact. The most wasted food in the UK, Paul, do you know what is the most commonly wasted food in the UK?
Oh, that I'm actually going to go and daftly say, I'm going to say it's bread.
No. Nearly, but it's potatoes.
Oh.
So, yeah. So we waste an inordinate amount of potatoes.
I don't want to know. It's one of those, I'm reading my list of similar things. It sort of is 40% of all food waste is carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And that's, as I said, obviously my list, it sort of was bread first, then potatoes. But it's things like pasta, it's other things like crisps and those sort of, I know crisps are, once again, potatoes.
Yeah.
It's the ideas as to those sorts of things and where things are going through. But 40% potatoes, think of how many potatoes you could give to people.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned bread, and I have to be honest that bread comes in at number two.
As I said, different sources say potato 1, bread 2, and other sources say bread 1, potato 2.
Yes, it is there. Something like, and we like statistics, 24 million slices of bread
Whoa,
are sort of wasted. You know, that's
that's a lot of sandwiches.
that's a lot of sandwiches. How many times do I know that I've been to sort of various events where, out come the lunch and you feed the few delegates, and what do you do with the waste? And so many places I've seen, they used to throw it all away, and that was terrible. And when I was in a training company, we used to entertain our customers, and we used to have a dinner and sandwiches and various other bits and pieces. And basically, we put it out, and they had an hour to eat. And after that hour, we cleared it all away. And where did it go? Basically, we were supposed to put it in the bin. I never took it to the bin. I used to take it upstairs to the sales and other places. And as I brought up the food, so this enormous gaggle of people would gather around me, and within seconds, I had nothing to throw away.
It was, yeah, and that's what one of the big movements have been happening is, and when we're talking about large, I say conference centers, they are doing these things where they are basically trying to, if they're not using the food, or more precisely the provision of food, they are trying to take that food and actually donate those things away, because it's not, it's, you've got to look at the things, they've spent the money already on the food and it hasn't been, it was estimated that approximately all businesses, 4 to 5% of all business turnover on, in companies, is actually on not food itself, because obviously you got catering, those sorts of things, which are not quite right, but actually on food waste and dealing with it. This is sort of whether it's having to get food, and you could actually not save money, but use, you're not losing the money. Don't think it's sort of a loss, more sort of think of it as a slight investment, or in people's health. But yes, there are loads of movements going on to do all this sort of, I wouldn't say sustainable, but to basically to get rid of food, outside of inside, I say inside companies, but if you can't do it, then go, literally drop it round food banks or even homeless shelters, those sort of places, where, it's not money you've used, the money's been spent, but it's sort of, you're not having to actually do much more effort to do, to get rid of it. Because unfortunately, bin collection and sort of those sort of things, it's quite a lot of money to actually process and deal with waste.
Yeah, it is. It's a big problem. And if we look at some of the facts here, every ton of food waste ending up in landfill produces basically 4.2 tons of greenhouse gases. That's methane and carbon dioxide. And so if you like, food waste was a country, then it would be the third highest emitter of greenhouse gases. And that's quite good. If you want to know who the first two would be, they're still China and the USA. But
It just shows it, yeah.
Just to sort of give you a worry. So basically, the most common reasons for food being wasted are overproduction, damaged packaging, and order mistakes, stock control, and sometimes these funny things called best before, use by, and display until dates.
Yeah, what we mean by those is, of course, is date labels. Yes. The common thing is they have the sell by dates as opposed to the use by dates. Now, the next question I ask you is that who actually makes up these magical dates?
It's not the government.
Well, well, this is a dumb list. It's not the government. It's not the consumer. Not you and I. It is not the growers of the food, as in, let's say you have fresh veg. They don't tell you when it's going to go off. No, it's actually more the manufacturers, or technically distributors, just before they hit the supermarkets.
Because I find there's always one interesting thing I do with my students, and we have a look at some food in some supermarkets, and on sale are some lovely apples, and we say, right, okay, and the kids say, yeah, these are fresh. Yep, they are, and it's often labelled as sort of fresh apples, yet you actually work out when they were picked and when they were put out and when they've got to be used by. And sometimes these apples might be a year since they've been picked, yet they've got a use by date of only a few days.
Yes, I was interested in this in regards to potatoes, going back to how many potatoes we use. And the answer is the potatoes you are buying today, or right here, right now, are actually potatoes harvested 3 years ago, and then basically been stored in large, I'm not saying dryers, but basically, silos with that humidity controlled of very low and in a really dark place, but at a low temperature. And it's one of those dumb things. And then, so that's how the system was chain goes along, and that we had quite not a potato shortage. That's the wrong way to describe it, because of course it was, because 3 years, you look at when was 3 years ago, that was down through lockdown when they were struggling to actually get enough, not harvesters, but sort of potato pickers to actually, pluck potatoes out of the ground, these farmers. And so there was a decrease in that potato yield in that year. And we just saw that the beginning of this year, where there was this, not lack of potatoes, but there wasn't, no place was full of potatoes, because of course that's just how it is. It's 3 years of sort of down the line of being from when they're being harvested to when they're being.
Yeah. Best before dates are about food quality rather than food safety. So basically, if something has passed its best before date, it doesn't mean to say it's unsafe, but it might have lost its colour or a little bit of its flavour or texture.
Yeah.
Now, you can, in fact, use those foods, but a lot of people don't. They look at it and say, oh, it's best before date's tomorrow, or I better not eat that. And they throw it away. Yet, they could actually eat it probably several days afterwards. It does depend upon the food and how it's stored.
Well, this is one of those things where, hilariously, you talk about the shelf life of a food item, and it is one of those dumb things where lots of packaging contains how much calories and all the mineral and vitamin contents of them, and that's all calculated by this expiration date, by saying post this expiration date they cannot guarantee it's going to have all these vitamin minerals, and
so therefore you should throw it away.
And therefore you should throw it away, which is a problem, because of course, yeah, sure, it's lost a calorie. Are you going to notice a single calorie as opposed to the 200 it's worth?
But the basic thing is you just buy less. And what you try to do is you try to basically organize things like your freezer. That basically you don't sort of shove things down the bottom. I know when we changed our freezer, we did find a couple of things down the bottom which basically had just escaped and they had missed the sort of cycling process, and therefore they were way beyond their sell by date. And the only thing we could do with that was dispose of it. But then, how do you dispose of it, Paul?
Well, there are a couple of problematic ones with waste disposal, as in food waste disposal, and the answer is depends on how it's being dealt with. If it is you've just got a pile of food waste, right, you can process that differently than if it's mixed into normal garbage and trash, waste. Because if it's in that, as in general waste, then unfortunately it's trying to sort it's problematic, and so unfortunately that has to be disposed of via the general waste process, as in either via landfill, which is the most common sort of, let's say 90% of all,
And the worst.
and the worst way, because of course that leads to creating lots of methane, which of course is bad from the thing, or a little bit gets incinerated, which is better. I'm not saying it's worse, but of course it's not exactly great for incineration anyway, so we'll go on over that. However, if your food waste is separated, as in you've got a general bin for food waste, that can actually go and be sent off to be turned into compost, and that then basically is then sold back to farmers, or more precisely, it's given to farmers, because that's how much the cost is, if that makes any sense. It's farmers can basically just pick it up. It's rather cheap and that sort of thing. It can be then basically, if it is moved in compost, and that's then recycled or it is recycling, I suppose. It is basically,
Yeah. So it's becoming fertilizer for the land rather than buying fertilizer. And that's not quite so bad trying to do that. So we've got a large amount of this food waste. And let's say that normal households have improved, but other parts haven't. So let's suppose you are a food producer. So let's have a go at the farmers first of all. So you produce some food, but some of that food's not going to be any good when you sort of go to harvest it for various reasons, which usually the British weather actually in this country.
yeah, yeah.
Causes all sorts of problems. And I remember watching Clarkson's farm, and he had loads of potatoes. And what he was doing was going around giving them to people. And that was ideal. But it's trying to sort of get rid of all the stuff. Either sell it because it's good, but how about you've just produced some carrots that, they're the wrong shape.
Yes, the term wonky.
Yeah, the
wonky foods, or the wonky fruit and veg that isn't deemed by the manufacturer or distributor as pristine or premium looking, or what looks like an apple.
But if I want a carrot, basically, does it matter that it's a perfect shape and it'll go into the latrine and get chopped nicely, or whether I could put a wonky one in there, and if I'm just bunging it in soup, who's going to know whether it was a wonky carrot or a nice looking one? Yet, basically, the good looking ones are used in food, and the other ones often end up in food.
Well, this is where I say food growers, food manufacturers and distributors, they grade food. You've got A class food and then B class food.
Yeah.
And essentially, if it's not if it doesn't look like pristine and sort of, I say pretty, that's the wrong way to, but sort of nice, then it's deemed as a B class. It's pretty nice, it's A. And so B class food, or goes to manufacturers who then steal things like they make soups and all sorts of things, but they don't really care. And then the premium A class food goes to the your shelves and those sorts of things, and to restaurants, all sorts of those sorts of places. But the problem is, it's sort of, is it on the cusp or an A or a B? The answer is, and so what they find is quite a lot of things actually get put a B sticker on them, literally labeled B, when
It could be an A.
it could be an A, but
An apple's just a little bit too small, so therefore it can't be an A, and it gets used. So one of the things we obviously do is we take food and we can use that. We eat it. Then others should be then redistributed to other people who can't get that. Some of that food could be used for animal feed, and that's all the prevention of waste that we can try and do. But, we are going to get some waste, and so we can recycle it. We can do anaerobic respiration there. We can compost food, but then you can also recover it, and then only finally should you basically dispose of it if it's sort of
yeah,
you can't do anything else with it.
Yeah.
And it should be this sort of upside down pyramid. We should be basically doing prevention, buying less, wasting less, and then if we haven't, then giving it to other people. And some people do give to other people, but a lot of people don't.
and we're not saying you give sort of your scraps to the homeless. No, we're not talking about that idea at all. It is the idea of, let's say you buy bread. How many people I know sort of don't like the end slices of bread, those end crust, and just throw that away? You see, they make perfectly good sandwiches, or slices of bread, because they are still bread. You see, this is the whole.
Some of my favourite.
Yeah, and so it's one of those problems you get that is a problem. Yeah, the other thing is one of they're talking about is that in relation to the amount of food you eat is portion control. You need what is estimated by the UN. So you an adult man needs something daft like 5,000 kilocalories a day, and women need something like 4,800 kilocalories a day, and that's obviously a day. So if you split that by 3 for 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then it's sort of not 1,000.
I work in joules, but yes.
Look, I'm sorry. Welcome to the UN in their funny kilocalories. Don't problem with conversion of statistics.
But basically, yeah, most, let's say, wealthier countries, people are overeating. You could eat a lot less and be a lot healthier. My mum tells me the story quite often of how bad it was during World War II. She can remember back that far. And how, in fact, people were often healthier then. And that's when I went out with my ration book, my mum's ration book, and I showed it to the students, and they thought, yeah, that's great. Yeah, we could live on that. And I then said,
the sticker, the classic one is
this was a week rather than a
sticker
day.
butter for a week. What? Yeah.
So people do eat too much, and we can waste a lot less. And basically, it comes down to you. Can you waste a lot less food by buying less? Now, that's initially going to then cause a problem to the industries who are still making lots of food, and then less will be sold. But over a period of time, they will adjust and find that they're not selling this much of this, so they produce less of this stuff. And therefore, things will and should get a little bit better. So maybe an idea there for reducing food waste. You've been listening to the Going Green podcast. We've been having a look at food waste, a problem that isn't really going away. And although might be getting better, it isn't really. some countries are doing really badly and others are absolutely starving. And we need to work on this basic problem. We'll be back next time with another article
Or something.
item
Yeah.
on going green. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Bye bye.
Bye.